Hello and welcome back to the Luckbox Podcast. Today I'm joined by Duncan Shields, better known as Thorin, and sometimes known as the esports historian.
Sometimes. Not as often as I'd like to imagine, but...
I'm curious, did you invent that?
I didn't actually. Here's an interesting detail. In fact, I met the guy yesterday. There's a guy, he's called, it's not a very famous person, he's not like a famous alien. He's called Simone, who works for Faceit. He's an Italian guy. Yeah. I think he's originally from Romania or something. And what happened was years and years ago, we're talking like probably more than half a decade ago, when Faceit used to just be in Milan, and they used to be a small company, and all they were doing was online cups on a Sunday. You know, like I think you used to have to beat like Cooler and Cypher, and you won $100. You know, is that sort of level, right? Yeah. Sometimes they would have like people fly out there, and all they would cover was your expenses. They wouldn't pay you anything because how could they? They're only paying the tournament $100, and basically, every time they would do it, they would make like a splash screen art, and they would do sort of like almost like a Soviet style drawing of the person, like a different, like really weird color scheme.
Those,
yeah,
those were brilliant.
So they did them for Too Good and Joe Miller. I'm guessing Joe Miller. You know,
I wished I was playing.
It was cool for that reason.
I wanted one of those.
And what they did was on that they would give like each person, they would try and come up with like a clever name. And so what happened is Simeone, this guy, was someone who was also a very old school person from esports. I think he was playing like Brood War in the beginning of the 2000s. So he knew that like I'm one of the original sort of oldest people in the scene who have been followed. So he came up with that tagline. I thought, what a great name. Because before that, you know, I did already do that kind of work, but I'd never thought to brand it that way.
Okay. Yeah, you've not got... I was going to say you don't have the ego to call it yourself.
I do.
But you
probably
now, do. Yeah. See, if nobody else had called you that, maybe you would have just...
Well, plus, to be fair, in the early days, it would be pretentious to call yourself an esports historian because there was no history. It was the beginning, right? I always used to tell people this. You could back me up, Sujoy. We didn't even used to call it esports. It was called Quake.
Yeah.
And then after that, you were like, oh, some other people here, non-related to us, playing Counter-Strike.
Yep.
It was no scene. We weren't all together. In fact, if anything, you remember, we hated the people who play Counter-Strike. They're all noobs signing me our boxes, remember? We can't say that now, of course, but we all know it was true.
No, it was. I remember those days because I was a Quake player. My history is in Quake. I thought, look, I played the best game, obviously. Of course, it's self-evident. And we talk about Quake, and it's way better than this other thing, Counter-Strike, this new kid on the block. It's just... And then... over the years, Counter-Strike continues to grow, wildly popular, bigger tournaments, and Quake is like going the other way. And
Sorry, we're here. We made it out alive.
yeah, we're still in. And I just want to also say we're really lucky to get you here in the studio. Okay. Because it was the Esports Awards last night.
It was, yeah.
How are you feeling?
I might not necessarily be 100% compos mentis, as they say, but whatever. If you know how many videos I do, mate, I've done so many when I was tired in the morning. I'll be all right. I'll soldier through.
Okay, all right. Well, but you didn't win. Is that going to affect you?
I didn't. Here's the one thing. The one thing I will say is whack is for some weird reason this year they started introducing this thing where they were like telling people who came third and second. It's like, well, you don't win an award, so it's not like the Olympics. You know, I don't get like a silver medal for coming second. Well, why are you telling me I was second? I'd rather think no one voted for me if I didn't win, right? No, the thing is, like, first of all, Jacob will very well deserved win. Like, he's in terms of like investigative journalism, revealing stories, he's probably the number one person in the industry at the moment. Richard doesn't do as much, you know. Not a lot of people, because they don't work for ESPN, have the cachet to be able to get those stories. And also, I think for that award, like, it's not like a player award. You know, you can't just be like Michael Jordan and win the MVP like 5 times. You know, it's going to be someone different every year, probably. I think it's just logical for that award. You know, it'd be a bit weird if Richard just won it 4 years in a row. You know, even if he was the best. Unfortunately, I don't think they're going to do it that way.
Well, you said it was a surprise last year when you won it.
It was.
I mean, do you think you're not well liked? And obviously there's different aspects of esports, right? There's the audience, there's the community, and they're all different because the community doesn't always communicate the same way the audience does.
This is one of the key things I had to learn, actually, is the problem is as a content creator, especially when you start out smaller, every comment you're reading because you want to get feedback or you want to see do people actually like this, what's the response, and you're thinking of that as the feedback loop, right? But what you have to learn over time is eventually, once the numbers scale up and the video has 40,000 views or whatever, suddenly 100 comments, even if every single one's negative, is actually not representative of the audience. It's like 100 people, and then 39,900 didn't bother commenting because they thought it was okay or they liked it or whatever, you know. And plus, if you just like something, you tend not to say like, "Great show." You go on with your life, don't you? I do that if I watch Joe Rogan podcast.
You watch it, and
I don't comment on that. The person who comments is the guy who's mad at it, right? So, like you're saying here, I wouldn't have thought I would win because I know there is like a public voting component within it. So I could see why they'd give it to Richard, especially because, he's done a lot of great things just objectively, broken like betting scandals and things. These are things that objectively everyone could see is really good for the scene. Whereas my stuff, I think a lot of people don't understand is journalism, actually. I always get a lot of people tell me, you're not really a journalist, are you? I go, have you ever heard of an op-ed? Like a column? Have you ever read a newspaper? Like, I'm literally basically doing that. I'm like it's like my little column here in the, I won't say the Sun. I'd hope I wouldn't be in the Sun. But, in the newspaper where you give your opinions on the world, and hopefully you do it from an informed place, and that's why you're the columnist, right?
Well, and it's also, you have to accept the fact that esports is something that is worthy of analysis. To say, discuss the teams and discuss where they are, how they're feeling, the dynamics that go on in this scene. You have to accept that that's worth talking about, to say that's journalism as well. Maybe some people are not.
I can see that point of view, but the thing is, like, this is also something I feel like is really lacking. But again, only with the very vocal minority. A lot of people, I think, get this on some intuitive level. Is we all want to say that we watch this game because we're so into the game and I know everything about the strategies, and I just want to hear real hard-boiled analysis of the X's and O's and why did they throw that smoke there. You know what, mate? Very few people want to hear that. They want to hear that occasionally, and even when they do, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think half the time they're just sort of thinking in their brain, I don't really know what this is, but I think it's really smart. Yeah, I agree. Great point there. What they really want, I was talking, funnily enough, to Golden Boy, one of the hosts of the show, about this just when I was coming out of the hotel. Because he kind of gets this, right? If you notice, he does a lot of antics and a lot of like fun little skits and stuff. He gets this point, which is the number one thing someone watches when they watch any broadcast like this, even a game, they want to be entertained. Right. If you can do that first and foremost, everything else is like a bonus. Like if you can also educate them, if you can also make the match really epic, if you can also, but if you can entertain them first and foremost, then you got a viewer. Because the problem is, I've seen a lot of games, that weren't that great, and people try to just do pure analysis. Those are the ones that sort of die in their ass.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my philosophy, at least. Everyone can have a different approach.
Yeah, fair enough. But going back to the esports awards, There's been a fair amount of criticism flying around.
Of course, yeah.
And
there always will be, by the way.
Yeah, there is. And this is the other thing, is that there are people behind the scenes. And I think I've heard you say something like the suits, the businessmen behind the scenes. And sometimes you worry about their motivations, what they're why they're involved. Yeah. And as particularly in esports, where we've seen outside industry want to get involved, whether it's betting, which we should talk about at some point, or journalists or other event organizers, and you, I think it's this protective feeling we get as esports people, as people who've been involved in the growth of this industry, wondering what they want. I mean, does it worry you when you see?
It doesn't as much now, like it did in the past. Here's the thing, okay? I used to be the guy who used to get I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, right? I used to get so much shit because when things like CGS came along, I said from day one, this is terrible. Like, even if it works, we've now bought away the franchises into the TV. They don't play everyone else anymore. Like, there are elements to this that wouldn't work, even if it was like we were very optimistic and it was all amazing. Plus, I remember thinking at the time, like, it's clearly not as big as they want it to be. So, like, either you've duped someone who's going to get ripped off, basically, or even worse, they're doing it as a cynical cash in to get something out of it. Yeah. Like as I learned later, putting on, this is the reason why E-League love doing their CSGO events. It doesn't matter that you see the prize, but $1 million a season. That is so much cheaper than whatever TV show they'd have to publish to put like 10 episodes out or something. You pay the actors, all the union people who work on the show. So as a result, the big concern in the past especially was when people come in with the big money, which back then wasn't big money. To us, it was big money.
It was big money if you got more than $100 in.
But when those people came in, there was a good reason to be suspicious. There's no way they could, especially when they were like really big people, like we're saying, like people on like satellite television. There's no way they could actually know about the game. There's no way they could actually like it that much. Like maybe the odd person in the company did, but clearly a lot of it was disingenuous. The reason why I'm not as worried now is because over time it's become just organically more legit. So it is a real thing. Like, and I could believe now some kid who works at a newspaper actually did used to follow the game 5 years ago. That's not ridiculous anymore. We look at the number of people following. Plus, I have to say, just from like a survival point of view, I think I've got a lot better also sort of gauging who the people who seem a bit shady are. Like you can sort of tell people's intentions by how they present it,
Well, maybe because we've seen so many disasters in our time that it becomes easier to spot. That's a bit of a sad thing to point out. Now, I was obviously involved in CGS as well. Yeah. I was the London team captain for the first year when they went outside of North America. And I mean, I guess I had hopes. I had hopes that they would do it right.
I think that was what everyone's perspective was, right, mate? Everyone involved in it was like, especially because at that point in time, we were like sort of like hitting a plateau or a lull,
No, we were definitely.
It was just unbridled optimism. So what happened is the people came in. Listen, like I said, their idea was kind of patently stupid when you saw the whole system of how the scoring worked. That was never going to make any sense to us. Yeah. But you just hoped it could work. And also, it's another thing about the way esports is going now. Even when something comes along you're not that into, but it's bringing exposure, it's bringing money, there's always the hope that, like, that old saying, like, rising tide carries all ships. Like, if that can go up, like if Fortnite or whatever can get really big, maybe we all sort of go in the backdraft with it and we go up with it. And eventually CS is up there as well. That's sort of, again, a bit of unbridled optimism, but you got to hope for something, right?
Well, you say that, right? But one of the most controversial things in the esports awards was Ninja getting esports personality of the year. Yeah. Right? And see, okay, if you want my opinion, I've got quite a narrow definition maybe of what esports is compared to, say, the industry as a whole. And I don't particularly think what Ninja does is esports, although he has been involved in esports.
Here's the thing, like, let's be real. There's nobody can have a definition of esports where Ninja's involved. Because esports is competitive gaming, right?
Okay, he's so you say nobody can have that opinion. Yeah, sorry, go through with your argument.
Because it's... Why have we put the sports part in if it's just fun? Like, put it this way, you wouldn't count the guys who play on... I mean, it's a dated reference now, but... Bullseye, the old game in the UK, it's a game show where you went and played darts. You wouldn't go, the winner of best personality darts player of the year is going to be... Like, you'd never give it to him, would you? Like, I don't have any problem with those people being in gaming and they're playing what might be an esports game. That's a definition you could give, right? But the idea is esports personality is supposed to be someone in the scene, either a player or someone. Like, the problem with that one is they've already got their own streamer category, so it was unnecessary to bleed that over. I think
which he also won, by the way.
That's the problem as well. I think cynically, because I'm on the panel, so I know some of these things. I think cynically they just think to themselves, it's not that interesting a category, so if we put some big streamers in, it blows it up a bit. And by the way, anytime he gets Ninja himself to tweet it out, you're getting way more social media for him than anyone else. So,
of course, and the headlines you get,
of course,
which they'll be thinking, wow, that's great headlines for esports awards, surely.
So the thing for me with that one is, first of all, don't worry, some people on the panel, we even said this year when we had our meeting to discuss who are the people nominated, we even told them, like, let's just get the streamers out there. The variety streamers shouldn't be in this one, give them their own section, And then secondly, I think moving forwards, like, either something like that shouldn't be a public vote, in which case if he was actually a great personality, we could give it to him, Or if it's a public vote, you can't just have the streamers in because they automatically win anyway. Again, how's like Golden Boy going to beat Ninja?
Yeah.
It's one tweet,
it's the strength of the audience,
So I agree, that's a flawed one. But then again, that is one of the more peripheral ones.
But just to challenge you then, you're saying what he does is not esports, which I actually agree with, but I want to challenge you on, some people would classify esports as a competitive level of gaming that is consumed as entertainment, say. Does it have to be
so
the
then
most
any kid in the world who turns on Twitch stream, he's now an esports player?
Okay.
He's got one viewer,
so
his mum.
But it depends on how many people want to watch it.
What's the threshold then?
Okay, that's difficult.
It's the problem with talking to journalists, mate,
Yeah,
we're not going vague. No, see, here's the thing. I know what you're trying to say there, but I'll put it this way. Here's something, one of the things that I would say probably is my specialty in terms of how I like break down the scene. Because, for example, people like Richard are amazing at knowing, like, right, what detail can I hunt down here, or what's the extra piece of information that no one's put together. I've noticed my strength is once I have the basic information, trying to figure out what people didn't say. Like when they say something here, it implies something that they didn't say. So I'll give you an example. Why is it whenever you say Ninja's not in esports, people immediately say he played Halo? Wait a minute, why would you need to say that? If he's playing Fortnite now, he's in esports. Why is that the go-to argument? Then they go with, but Fortnite has big esports. It has prize money now. Does prize money define esports? I don't think so. If some Arab sheik puts on a thing now and pays you $1 million to go and play him in a match, you're not a professional player.
Oh, I'll definitely do it.
You'll do it,
by the way. Yeah, if you're out there, just give me a call.
For the next 10 minutes, we'll say you are. Yeah.
Okay. But there's the Pro-Am stuff he did. The E3, sure. There was the event. Now, here's the thing: that wasn't competitive in that these aren't the best. This isn't an attempt to get the best field in the world. Yeah. It's designed as entertainment, and I wonder what Fortnite will look like over the course of the year. I don't know if you have more inside information.
I don't have any inside information on this one, mate. It's just speculation.
We'll wait and see, I guess. But maybe they will have an esports.
Here's the problem I have with that game, mate. Is like I've seen this happen in esports before. That looks to me. Unlike because it's had its own unique, unprecedented success, where it came along as a game, and even outside of esports, it just got all these like 14-year-olds just going crazy playing it. Or you have all these professional athletes saying they're playing it, that doesn't come from esports. Remember, that started before esports because they're doing the pro-am stuff now. So as a result, I don't see it actually as an esports phenomenon. I see it as just a cultural phenomenon. So the analogy I would give is like Pokemon cards, Pogs, if you go back far enough, I mean, if you go back to when your parents were a kid, marbles, yo-yos, what happens is there's a thing that comes along, it gets popular for a year or so, and because it gets popular, everyone sort of jumps in. Everyone's like, hey, what are they doing? And then that's why I give the example of like Pogs, right? Because if you were there one year, this would be like, I don't know, 1994 or something. If you had your Pogs, everyone was loving that. There was books about it. But if you came a month after Pogs went out, you were an idiot. Everyone's like, what are you doing with Pogs? Now, what's funny is this has actually happened in the past. People don't know this. That's why actually the Korean scene was very exaggerated. Like, you should ask this now, right? Esports is massive. Korean scene shows all these viewers, all these players. Where's all their money? They have way less money than North America, mate. The reason why is because, yes, games like League of Legends and Overwatch have done pretty well. Like, they're big esports games. But StarCraft Brood War was actually just a social phenomenon. Like, the best way I heard it explained when I was talking to some people when I used to live there was a guy just told me, oh, that wasn't about esports. It wasn't that we were, we played the game or followed it because we watched Boxer or whatever, He said what happened was it just became a phenomenon of what kids did instead of going to the library is you would sneak off to the PC bang, you'd pay the $5, and what you'd do is, he said, it's what we all did when we were 12. It was a social phenomenon. It was like Pogs or something,
Yeah, fair enough. So will we not see the same heights in new games, Overwatch, League of Legends?
No, unfortunately, because those are esports games to me. Like, the big problem I have with those ones is, like, listen, Fortnite, I don't know how long the fad will last. Maybe it'll be a few years, But the problem I have is, like, two things. One, people thinking that, like, it's going to keep going up and up and up. If anything, I think it's got probably the best penetration in the mainstream we've ever seen for a game related to esports. So there's no real reason to expect it'll necessarily go much bigger. Like I say, there's like NBA stars shouting out in interviews. Like, that's pretty huge, mate.
Yeah.
So that's massive as it is. And then the other side of the equation is what follows it up, what maintains that? Because you've already seen the other battle royales aren't the same level. And even the other classic thing everyone's doing in esports. I don't blame anyone because there's this principle in esports, right? Which is every new massive number one game is never the same genre as the one before. So you go from a Counter-Strike, it's like a 1v1. No, you go from Quake, it's like a 1v1 FPS, but it's like very hardcore. Counter-Strike's the more realistic, tactical-based one. Then you go to, I don't know, whatever you want, Warcraft, StarCraft, whatever it is. They're very, very different games, RTS. Then you go to League of Legends, it's a MOBA, but again, totally different from Warcraft 3. Now you come into what? Exactly, maybe the Battle Royales if they're going to get an esports side. So the problem is, everyone sees the big game. So we all know Riot's working on a Battle Royale, Valve's hinting at a Battle Royale, Call of Duty just made a Battle Royale. Yep. The problem with that logic is, it's like thinking like, oh, Coke's really popular. Let's make our own soft drink that tastes like Coke. Yeah, it sounds like a great idea, but you're probably never going to beat them, right? If anything, the way you beat them is you have the drink that exceeds that and it's totally different, right?
Yeah, but being ahead of the curve is not the easiest thing.
Impossible, right? Almost.
Whereas copying people is much easier to do. I want to ask you more about being an esports historian then, because even if you didn't come up with the name yourself, I think it's a worthy,
it's a very good one, isn't it?
It's one you must be quite proud of that people actually use. What I want to ask is like, what is your approach to esports that makes you fit that bill of being a historian? Like, and is it useful? Is it useful to know the history and things that have happened?
That's a very good question, Sujoy, because for a long time, I'm going to say 10 plus years, it wasn't useful, except in like a very low paying job. You used to make like minimum wage, So everyone would have told you, you're wasting your life, who cares? In fact, this is something people don't know. I actually used to be, not all the players, some of the players respected the ones that were really into it, but there used to be pro players who actually just considered me like a worse nerd than them and were sort of like repulsed. They were like, oh, why is this guy so into like what I'm doing in like Counter-Strike?
Yeah, at least they're playing, right? You're just watching them play and being really
to them, it's a bit. I always give this analogy that like, just because it's one of my type of analogy. I always say the way they treated me was like the way a supermodel would treat someone who comes in who's like, oh, I love all your photos. I've got a foot fetish for you. And they'd be like, okay, I might stay clear of you a little bit. Like, it weirded them out a bit that you were so into it because they're into it because they're the one playing and they're trying to win, That's why, that's their philosophy. So the point is, at the time, even pro players would have said, like, who cares about all the history? Like, I used to do interviews where players were like, I don't remember that happening or whatever. They didn't care. But first of all, the reason why I think I was able to get in that position is, even from the very beginning, I was like one of those people who, when I was a fan of something, I'm like a hardcore fan. And what I do is I pick like whoever the best is in whatever field I do. So I'll give you a good analogy. I like to read comic books, right? But I would never say I'm an expert about comic books, because if you ask me like, oh, what's the Spider-Man comic out now, or what's happening with the Hulk, I couldn't tell you, man. I don't read those books. But what I do is I have like my favorite authors, and I've read everything they've ever written. It's like that's like the philosophy on how I do everything. And then in doing so, I just started with the best people in Quake. And then actually that was how I was able to transition games. So when Counter-Strike came along, I thought it was for noobs as well. But what I did is, back on the old Access Reality, we had the CS version, and I thought, well, at least I've played Counter-Strike before, so I wonder what the best player looks like. You know, I think it was like K-Sharp or something. I downloaded the demo. I was like, this guy's insane. Like, what?
Well, even though rings a bell.
Even though, you know, it's not Quake.
Yeah.
Considering when you're familiar with the environment, you're like, that's insane. So then I started checking out a bit more, and what I learned was, basically the short version, I'm elitist, and I'm absolutely, absolutely. Elitist. So the key to bring it all full circle, even though people didn't get it back then, one of the reasons why I always probably came off too hardcore at the beginning is because part of me, because I really cared about who was number one and who was going to be top 10 and what this ranking meant. I actually did, even though I couldn't have been as prescient to know esports to be here now, I didn't want people 2 years later to look back and go like, who was the number one player then? Did we really know? Could have been anyone, right? I wanted it to be like, if I go back, like if I get into a sport, so the last few years I got into the NFL a little bit. What I love about that is you can just go back through all the history. You know, you can go watch some classic Super Bowl from the 80s. It'll be on YouTube, you know. There'll be all news articles about it. You can get all the context now, actually. It's like being able to travel back in time. It's really cool. So I even though I couldn't know it was going to be where it is now, I was always into that stuff. That's why it's such an apt title. Like, it's a shame I didn't come up with it myself. It'd be pretty baller if I'd actually named it from day one, but it's just someone else observed what I was doing, basically.
And I guess if it's important to you, then it should be recorded. It should be noted as something that happened.
Sure.
Okay? These were the results. This was happening at the time. Because if no one's recording it, is it important?
Mate, this is why it's funny that back then a lot of the players were like a bit put off, you know, and they were even sort of like here's the thing, they could see the appeal of like mainstream stuff coming in, but again, these are just nerd sites. We all post on these forums. They were thinking, why is it really a big deal what people post? Those are the people, the Fatalities, Machiavelli, they are the people who are the loveliest to me now, mate, because the thing is, without me, to some degree, people don't really remember these people, you know, sadly, because even though to you or I, they're like some legend, you know, like Pele or something. The problem is, it's the equivalent of a kid who only started football 2 years ago. He doesn't know who Pele is. He vaguely maybe heard the name, you know. So those people, the reason why they're so nice to me now is because they now kind of get it. Like, it took a while, but they've come full circle and they realize, like, unless someone, first of all, puts you in the context of history, you can't be considered a great player. There's only now. And if there's only now and you're not playing, you're done. And then secondly, you want someone who can also sort of tell the old stories, you know, and bring it back.
Yeah. Okay. And Fatality just won, was just
He was inducted in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. There was the ESL, IEM Hall of Fame, I take it. And that a worthy thing to just to retell the story, right?
Yes.
For people who don't know who he is and what he did. But, okay. Fair enough. But so in your history, though, there's been times when you probably didn't make a living. You didn't manage to make ends meet, or it looked like it was going to be a struggle.
Yeah. The thing is, first of all, I come from the northeast of England, which is like the cheapest place in the UK. So cut in half any imagined prices you have from London, and obviously we're going back in time a bit as well, so the inflation was less. Then on top of that, I lived with my parents for a long time, mate. And one of the reasons why is the only if you can cut out rent, that's another way to make a living from esports, right? Because the worst part is you're also often making your money in dollars, so you're converting that into pounds. I was loving that when the pound was like twice as much of a dollar, like 12 years ago or something. Wasn't a fan. And then the other key thing is, in the early days, because I was just a nerd, I was super into it. Yeah, at that point I was willing to give everything up because that's what you do when you're super into something, you're passionate, you know. But I will say there were later times in my life where I had to just give up all my social life, basically. Like, I mean, admittedly, I wasn't a super social person then, so it went hand in hand, you know, and that probably exacerbates it, to be honest, if you just spend all the time on the computer. But it means that, you know, if there was a band playing that I want to see, some of them I never got to see. Like, for example, so Scoops knows this, I'm a huge fan of the band Rush, the Canadian prog rock band.
Okay.
They've retired touring now, mate. I never got to see him. Because I kept thinking every time, they'll be doing it next year again, you know. I never got to see him.
So if you could go back, would you go to the Rush concert and pack in esports?
Here's the problem. I'll give you another example that's a good one. We did an event in 2011 in Seoul. It was called E-Stars Seoul. It was one of those ones done by Kan Yang and those guys who did like WEG and WEM, you know. He still works with someone, I think he works at Imba TV now or something. And when they did this event, it turned out that the first day of this event, it was just a normal Counter-Strike tournament, in 1.6. The first day was also when the grand final of the Korean Brood War Pro League was taking place. And it was taking place between SK Telecom and KT Rolster, the two best teams and the two most historic teams. And this is when like Flash was at his prime and they had Bisu and Fantasy on SKT. And this final was like the final of Pro League, right? And it turned out it was not only being held in Seoul, but it was literally like down the block from where we were. And everyone I knew told me, dude, it's day one. Like, no one cares about these interviews. Just go to the match, come for the other days, do your interviews for the other days, and then everyone wins, right? No one's going to complain. You'll get a day off. But what's mad is I actually didn't take the day off. I went to day one. I did all the rubbish interviews you do on day one. How you feel about the tournament? Oh, you lost the first match. What happened? All that crap. And the point I'm getting to here is, does part of me think, well, no one's ever going to watch that interview from 2011 E-Star Seoul day one, whereas, I could have had that memory from the match. But I have to say, if I was the kind of person who would have slacked off like that, I wouldn't be here now.
Okay.
Yeah,
but do you like where you're here now, having missed all of the Rush concerts?
Sure. It was worth it.
Yeah.
The key thing for me is, like, this is the one aspect I would say is, like, I'm not saying that like a sob story. Like, at the time, I was like, oh, unless I make it big, what am I doing with my life? Not at all times in esports, at all times, I could always find something in the game that like was sustaining. So even if no one read that article or no one watched the video, as long as it was a match I was really into, that's why I like the narrative stuff, mate. That's the stuff that hooks you on like a human level, As long as I could get in that way, I never really regretted any of the stuff I did in that sense, even if it didn't always get views or the scene was just way smaller back then. It had its own merit, like sort of self-validation, I guess you could say.
Okay. Throughout your history, you've had... there's been controversy, let's say, that's followed you around. And I want to know, because the controversy tends to stem from you being very honest and straightforward with your opinions. Is that something you do in esports, or is it something that's part of your whole life?
Here's a great opportunity, right, to show how different esports is now from the past. Because now, like I said, if I meet Fatality or any player that I might have ever criticised, or, there was ever any sort of like within the small scene we were in, people were always at each other, because we all talked a lot of shit back then. Yeah. Now, everyone's cool because we've all matured and we all get what it's all about, right? So here's an example. Back in the early days, when we were on the old Access Reality, me and you had some back and forths from time to time, They weren't always super pleasant.
Most people would just do what I told them to. But you weren't like that. I remember.
No, that's what I mean, though. And so at the time, I'm sure it's very easy to think like, oh, this is someone who's just like, they're just too in their own way, Like they have their own opinion and they think that that's right and they're battling me over it and stuff, and hey, we're just having fun on a forum, why can't we just all get along, But even back then I was like a very intense person in that sense, Now, admittedly, if I look back now, yeah, some of it's probably factors like, I was like 18 at the time, I probably didn't have my identity formed. If you've ever seen what young people are like, they tend to make up for not knowing who they are by trying to think that they do and be extreme, like, no, I'm this, so I'm the biggest fan of this band ever, or I'm in this subculture or something, That's kind of what people tend to do, to feel like, right, now I know who I am, sort of making it up as you go along. But I have always had that vibe to me. The problem I ran into, it turned out, was I didn't really become like a proper on-camera personality until maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And so I'd been in esports a long time. Because I was behind the curtain, I could have all these opinions. And because I didn't put them in my work, and I don't think I even got Twitter till like 2009, no one knew them, So it's only people I worked with who maybe find out some crazy opinion I had. So basically, I thought, unlike all these frauds who were just giving like a fake, polite opinion, but they really think this guy's trash or this person he's a scumbag. I thought, like, I'm never going to be like that, because actually part of my identity at the time, to some degree, it's still like a core quality I maintain, is like integrity. It's like I'm never going to, like, here's the thing, one of the reasons why, even if I didn't banter and I didn't make fun of people on CS broadcasts, I would be just as unpopular, because here's the thing, if you have a team that is actually not very good, and they have had a fluke result, and at the next tournament, people are like, are they going to do really well? I'll say, no, they're terrible. Look at them for all these... Now, that's never going to be a popular opinion. People want to believe, no, they are going to be good. Like, how can you say they're terrible? Why can't you just praise people for what they do well? It's a different mentality from some people. It's not from everyone. So as a result, like, I'm always going to have that streak within me. Now, what I actually learned over time, I think, is... Like, I wouldn't say I've got, like, pure charisma, because to me, charisma is like you attract people to you and, like, oh, they want to hear what you say and listen to it. They do, but I sort of did it. I always give the analogy, it's kind of like a wrestling heel. I kind of, like, got kind of like an anti-charisma that I put on top, which still makes it entertaining and people want to hear it, but, like, they almost want to hear it to disagree,
Okay. But I suppose when you eventually give someone praise, they know you actually mean it as well.
I would hope, yeah. Like, here's the thing. I know there is a problem with players where some of them feel like if you've said they were bad in the past and then you say it's good now, some of them feel like, screw that guy though. Like, who cares what he says now? So some of them don't always take it to heart. But I agree. To me, this is what people don't realize is if I do say like a player's amazing and if I'm like, all the superlatives. Yeah, I really mean that. Like, I would never just say that because he's the hot player at the moment, you know.
Yeah, it's not a breakfast news show where everybody's very, very polite.
Exactly.
And ask the questions that the other person wants to hear. You actually don't mind asking.
Sure.
And you have. Now here's the thing: is like I was looking up some of these pieces. The hit pieces against you.
Like, getting quite a collection now, aren't I?
Well, PC Games N was I think just last year because you won the award and they did.
Nice reason to write an article, right?
Yeah, so you just won Journalist of the Year from Esports Industry Awards, and PC Games N, or the writer there, I've forgotten her name actually, but they took umbrage with the people that had been selected as role models for esports. They said these people should not have been role models, and they picked out you particularly. And Richard, and I think maybe some others as well. Now, are they being thin-skinned? Oh, like
my biggest problem with that one, mate, is I actually know for a fact that writer and her editor do not know esports. So why are they doing an article saying who should be nominated for an award? And you'll notice in the award, in the section, here's how you know someone's fake, right? Is if you ask me, let's make up a random opinion. Is coldzera the best player in the world now? I don't just say no because he's not good, end of story. I'll say no because this person is, here's the reasons why they are, and in doing so, or maybe one or two reasons why coldzera isn't, put them together, there you go, there's an argument, right? As soon as the other person doesn't mention names, I'm suspicious immediately. Because that would be the first thing you'd mention. It strengthens your case, right? Not only should this person not be, because they've represented gaming in these bad ways, that was the premise of the article, but this is who should be. This person here is a great journalist, so they could have picked anyone. Emily Rand from ESPN. Perfectly spotless, clean record, never done anything controversial, amazing work. You'd pick someone like that, you'd say this is who it should be, for these reasons. They don't know who she is. It's a disingenuous article from step one, Right. By the way, you could write, someone in the esports, since it's been done, could write an article like that, like, should Thorin be allowed to represent us? I'd at least give that person like a chair. But if I look into it and I find out this they're just doing it to drive outrage and that sort of thing that's unfortunately become quite popular in media, then I kind of can't even get on board with the premise initially. Like, for example, one of the worst things about that article, I always say this, is later on in the article, this is how you know the person doesn't know esports. They say, because they try to bill it, remember, it's not just that me and Richard are bad guys. It's that we're guys and we're white guys. And they go with that angle, the identity politics angle. So what they spin it into eventually is, but there are women in esports who are starting to make it through. And then they name check Pansy, Shox, and Froscorin. And they say it as if, it's because of like new diversity initiatives that have helped them people. That is actual sexism, because none of those people had any diversity thing where someone told them you have to hire a woman to do this. They made it up legit through a pure meritocracy of a man's world. They came in fact, people like Froscorin literally broke glass ceilings. Like, people were telling her and her company, listen, you can be a host or you can be like the interviewer and be a woman, but you can't be an analyst and be the authoritative one. And she broke through all that. She became the number one analyst in League of Legends. So the worst thing about that article, beyond the stuff about me, because at least there was some like grain of truth to some of the things they were talking about, was they spun that narrative completely false. So anyone who's reading that would think that we've got to do more of these sorts of things and get out these bad guys to help these people through. Whereas actually these are people like me and Richard have been more than happy to welcome into the scene because they're brilliant.
Right. And I think this is the key difference, right? Esports as a new industry, and you say like you hadn't been on camera, that's because we really didn't have cameras in esports until...
But even then, mate, I always say this. I'll never say who it is because I don't like to like leak private conversations, but there were a couple of very famous people in esports for being on camera who told me years ago when I first did a little bit of commentary for like ESL, they said, listen, maybe you could keep doing this like colour commentary thing, but you'll never be on camera. Like you don't have the charisma for it. No one's going to watch you. Like now, funnily enough, I'm on camera at events now where they're not on camera. So it's interesting how things work out. But they were right at the time, by the way. I hadn't leveled up my skill set.
But what I want to say is that esports feels very different. And again, I've got this point of view because I've been involved in it forever, and it feels like my scene, it's my industry, my underground thing. But when we started getting live streams, we had shows that were happy to offend people, happy to go extra step to be outrageous and interesting. I'm thinking particularly like James Harding, the way he broadcasts, and a lot of esports is like that, where people just say what they think, and it was kind of fun and refreshing, and I liked it.
Of course. Because it was genuine, right? The thing is, we didn't make that up. That was the scene. Because think about it, this is why the whole angle, which is why I hate the fact that politics has gotten involved in esports. Because as with other things, they're rewriting the history of what was going on. So the reason why esports was like that, it's pretty logical. It was the Wild West. Like, I used to be in the 90s, just reading books on the topic, be really into like the scene of, you remember when it was like hacking was the cool thing, you know, like people who could like get into like CIA computer or something. And the whole thing about that scene was it was the same thing. It was all like these really intense, like 18-year-old young men in America. Probably some genius guy, but you know, he doesn't focus on school. Instead, he's at all night on the computer. And if you ever saw the scene they had, they were all flaming each other all day long. And half the battles they were doing, trying to hack each other to show its supremacy and stuff. That's what esports was like. It was just a bunch of dudes doing that, you know, and the odd woman who was just happened to be super into the game as well.
Yeah, and we've mentioned a few times XS Reality. It's around as ES Reality now. We're talking about an old Quake site I used to run. Duncan writing on there many years ago. But that was the feeling on there. It was very much anarchy. And
what's great is I meet a few people now. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, someone at the Esports Awards, this is how naive the new people in the industry are. They go, "Are you familiar with Stuart Saw?" And I go, "I've only known him about 15 years."
Oh, you were on the IMG table.
So,
right?
So what I told them was, I said, in fact, I not only know him, I was in flame wars with him like 13 years ago. Because that's what it was like. In fact, the funny thing is, like I say, me and you, everyone, me, Carmack, you, Sujoy, Redeye, everyone was on there, of course. And we're all flaming each other super hard over everything.
But that's the thing. That's how I see how an argument should be. You should argue.
I think so, yeah.
You should put your point forward and get the other person to agree, disagree, or refute your argument. And then the audience of other people watching you can make a decision for themselves based on the arguments that are put forward. Whereas if you just cut someone off and say, you are banned, you're not allowed to talk anymore, you no longer get the argument. So
it's a great line that actually Christopher Hitchens used to have. It's because it's a very unique way to defend censorship, right? He would say, go against censorship rather. He would say the worst thing about censorship, regardless of what the opinion is it robs you of the right of being able to hear it, to even know what you think of it, you know?
Yeah. And what I worry about is you know, let's say we're trying to rally against sexism in an industry, and if you just cut people off who say something that's not your prescribed, this is correct.
Sure.
And you don't let them make their arguments, and you don't let them be refuted by other people, counter arguments, then anyone who, say, agreed with that first point of view that you didn't agree with is not going to be convinced either way. They're just going to maintain their current point of view. I mean,
I'd even say, mate, they get more radicalized because they feel like, my opinion's not allowed. There's a conspiracy against me. And then they get, because they don't have any outlet, it gets more intense.
See, that's one side of the argument. But on the other side, right, I need to try and, there's got to be a balance somewhere, because the games industry, let's just say, you know, you play pub games of Counter-Strike or Dota or League or anything like that. There's a level of toxicity in video games which is worse than, say, the norm of Facebook conversations or...
Oh, of course, but I mean, think about what we're doing. Again, first of all, who's the demographic? A lot of it's young men. Like, I'm not going to go like all anthropologist on you here, but young men, part of how they figure out where they are in the hierarchy of the world is you bash heads with people. You try and figure out, am I better than this guy? This guy. It's the reason why at school people are having all the fights, you know.
It's very competitive, and I'm afraid I don't know if this is sexist, but saying it's a testosterone-fueled activity. Maybe that's not necessarily well.
Just as a very broad stroke. Obviously, women do it as well, but it's just you notice there's a reason why it was all men in the early days of gaming. The same as some of the other analogies I gave you. And then the other part is like the reason why I worry about people trying to like disinfect that and make it too sterile is you actually need that for competition. Like that, like. Sure, there's a type of shit talking that's just being rude, like people do it to be edgy, but there's a type that is actually very important for competition. And if you go and see any top NFL player, NBA player, even to this day, sure, they're very clever now and they don't always catch it on the mic, they cut it out, etc. They're still talking mad shit to each other. Yeah. And that's because they're loving it, by the way. That gets you fired up. Then this guy's going at you. That's exactly what you're saying about the argument. You want people to come as hard as they can at you. Because not only that, but you know what? Sometimes you find out when someone comes at you, actually, my argument wasn't as strong as I thought. This is kind of a weakness here. I've got to think about that. Well, maybe I have to concede a little bit of ground on that one or change my tactic. You know?
Okay. I mean, that's the point. There's still a question, right? That when you become a role model for whatever reason, whether you're esports talent, an esports player, star, that you're held to a higher standard. So, for example, I mean, recently Valve had to just make a statement because a couple of players in Dota were being slightly racist.
They dropped N-bombs, yeah.
Well, there was a Chinese one. I don't know.
It was Ice. He was from, I think, Singapore. Yes,
yeah,
he literally dropped an N-bomb.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, see,
it's unfortunate. And then, yes, there was some people in the game did it as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, surely you look at that and you say, okay, no, players shouldn't be doing this because you've got to set a standard for everybody who's watching you. You're the one who all eyes are upon. Therefore, you have an extra level of responsibility.
To me, the thing is, though, I think it's quite a simple standard you set, which is in that particular case, you can't literally be dropping racial slurs. Like, come on, like even if for whatever reason in your
say your
culture,
your team's not punishing you for that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's still not okay.
No, as an individual, you shouldn't really be doing that. Come on. I mean, I think that's like a fairly obvious standard we could all agree upon. You know, like I've never understood this angle. I think it's actually just people trying to gaslight you, where they try to claim that if you're not in favour of censorship, you're in favour of just pure, everyone can say everything. Now, that seems a bit unreasonable, you know. Like in this scenario, I think just for good taste, it's fine for someone to say you can't say those things. Yeah. But the difference is if it's an opinion about something, now we have to get into the meat and veg of it and see what's actually going on there, you know. It's not as easy to just say, well, you can't say that. Because a word we can say, okay, that's off the table.
Okay. Right, fair enough.
What do you think?
Well, I think here's the thing is being in esports, for example, the first time I came on a Twitch stream, and it was at James's house because he was doing the TI4 hub, and it was like there was 50,000 people watching, mainly for the kittens, I think, actually, but there were people there as well. I come on, and the first thing you see in Twitch chat is loads of tryhards.
Yes,
and then like, is this new guy gonna steal the equipment and things like that? Because Twitch chat, as an entity, when it's unrestrained, tends to get quite bad.
It's the lowest common denominator. It's the mob, right? It really is.
And it's also people wanting to be heard, so they say something outrageous because they know then it's going to be, oh my god, that guy said this, and it's look, I'm getting noticed by the people I'm watching and the rest of the audience. So the thing is, though, I'm not offended because I've grown up through all of this shit. And this political correctness is kind of a recent thing.
Plus, I'm going to guess, right, I wouldn't speak for you, but even though you can't know who the people are in Twitch chat, I'm going to guess most of them doing that probably just some 16-year-old kid. You probably know if you met them, they're probably not actually a racist person, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it
would be very different if you felt they were, you know. If you thought this was like some neo-Nazis, and that'd be a very different scenario, right?
Here's the thing: is like living in London myself, there's basically no visible racism. So when someone is quite blatantly upfront like that, it's a little jarring, I suppose.
Of course, yeah.
But you're right. It's like, do I think that person is racist, or they are saying things?
They're just saying something that's kind of fucked up.
Really very good. Now, like, that's the thing is, I always ask this question of myself. But again, it comes down to if you're a role model, you don't even get that luxury of having your motivations questioned because you said that, therefore you're bad, rather than...
Sure.
I kind of feel like... I'm not sure. I think the level... There's a sweet spot where you interfere and you say, okay, you shouldn't be doing this, like Valve do, but they're generally hands-off. I think the way Riot and Blizzard approach the don't say anything offensive is a step too far, personally. And the way they chastise their players is a bit too much, and it's very big brothery, and it doesn't strike to me, it doesn't feel very true esports to me. And I think there is a divide between, and it's the same with how they run their leagues, the way Valve operates events run, and how Blizzard and Riot do this.
I always give the analogy, Riot and Blizzard are like the super strict Christian parent that's like, you're going to do everything this way, like, you know, God wants you to do it, and like, you know, there's no argument whatsoever. Yeah. Meanwhile, Valve, the joke I always give is, it's not that they're like the great parent, it's like, they're just the absent parent. So because they're out of the house, you're like, hey, they're out of the house, we can do whatever we want now. Yeah. So it's not always going to go great because you're going to do some stupid stuff, but at least generally you get to cut loose a bit, right?
Well, it's you follow many games. Who's right? and there's so many aspects to ask this question.
I know.
So, yeah.
The big problem I have with it is I would generally side with the Valve side of things. Like, I would say myself, like, here's the thing. I am somewhat in favor of free speech generally. Like, for example, I know it doesn't work for a big broadcast, but if someone's doing their own show and they say a bunch of stuff that you find really, whatever, politically or socially unacceptable, if it's their own little show, the best way I can see to deal with it is just everyone who doesn't like it doesn't watch it or says fuck this show. You know, that's a natural way the community can take care of itself. It doesn't work on a stream obviously because I'm going to watch the match anyway, so it's kind of an unfair standard. I wouldn't give it that way. So I would generally not be in favor of too much censorship, but I think there's definitely like a middle ground between the two approaches. They're too far on the opposite ends of the spectrum for me. The problem is the reason why I don't myself like petition for Valve to get more involved is I have to say, knowing the way game developers think, if they did get involved, they would just then go right over to the Riot Blizzard side. I'm pretty sure of it, mate, because unfortunately, like, this is a key thing. Everyone who's out there who like petitions like Valve, change something in Dota or CS, or if you ever talk to game devs, they think of it as though it's like, I made this game, this is my game, I'm going to let you play it. So, you know, be polite, do what I say. Yeah. Whereas, you know, to me and you, it's like, well, you made the game, but that's like someone who made the football. You know, the person who plays football, Messi's the one creating most of that, you know. You get a little bit of the credit, but he's the one who's doing all the stuff we really care about. So you can see there's a power divide there where we're seeing like that we're like you, we're peers, Valve. Like, can we change things? Whereas they're kind of thinking it's like, we should politely be, is it possible you could? Oh, no, okay. So there'll always be a bit of a divide there, I think, unfortunately.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Valve have two major esports games, and they operate them both kind of differently.
Yes.
So Dota, which is the game I follow much more religiously, I pretty much watch everything. They've evolved into this case where they have a landmark single event once a year, which kind of demarks like that season from the next season, and everything revolves around the international, which through the way they've monetized it has become the biggest prize fund in esports and in probably most sports as well.
It's got to be up there, yeah.
But whereas Counter-Strike, which has been around for a lot longer and probably is like one of the baseline games that launched Steam, right? That evolved slowly, gradually, with the community's help to get to what it is now, which is very different. Two majors and a series of events between, and not such a rigorous fixed schedule as I'd say Dota is, unless I'm wrong. But I mean, you've seen them both. Do you think the Counter-Strike one's better? Do you think the Dota one, which feels more premeditated, is a better format?
The thing is, I actually very recently thought of a pretty good way we could combine it, because the reason we could never do that in Counter-Strike is, yes, first of all, Valve wasn't taking care of it either. So even though we had the majors, you know, like the week after the majors, there might be an event. So you never got there never was like a season like that. It just kept going forever. Yeah. Which had a lot of benefits. I loved all the storylines, you know, you never have to stop if you're super in the game. But I figured out actually the way that we could kind of marry the two in a better way, which is now that we have the player break every year. So we have these 3 weeks, it's usually in August, where it's agreed that there will be no tournaments and therefore all the pro players have a holiday. And most of them literally, you can see on Instagram, go to the Maldives or Vietnam or something, you know, go to some amazing sunny holiday.
They spend the whole year playing, right? They just want to be able to get away.
None of them are playing games per hour. But what I think they should do is use the two majors to create a season like that. So have it so that what you do is the major, because this year the downside was they put the major after the player break. Partly it's a side topic because they asked the players and the players didn't think it through, you know. What they should have done, in my opinion, is the player break should always come after the major. And that way, and I even thought a cool way to add another element in to make it a season, because I don't want the whole circuit necessarily like other games, is let's combine this. So the major comes before the player break, and after every player break is when we do a map change. Because, you know, in CS, every now and then randomly, they'll just bring in like a new map and take another map out. But they do it literally randomly.
Right,
so they've done it one time. They did it at a major. They brought new maps in. No one had played before. So if you combine the two logically and you make it so that like the end of the season is the major, and after that, we start the season again after 3 weeks, you know, so there's like downtime after the biggest tournament, and crucially, we bring in a new map, so it feels like a new season. I think that would be a clever way to sort of like a soft season, as it were.
Yeah, but then you're sort of saying there should be a season. It should be such a fixed schedule
I think it would be
year after year is pretty much the same.
There are positives to it, but the reason I'm concerned is I actually do think the Dota model looks very good. Like I like the Dota Pro circuit.
Are you a bit jealous when you watch from the Counter-Strike analyst desk?
Especially, mate, because two things. One, in their game, they get loads of time for the analysis, way more than we do. And then secondly, because that Pro circuit they have now allows you to have legit circuit points to qualify people to the major. Our major is terrible for that, mate. We have teams from the last one just automatically qualified. So the thing I would get to on that is I actually think Valve's way of handling it has been very good, a lot better than WCS and StarCraft and League of Legends, LCS. But the concern I have is if the developer comes in and they make the whole circuit, is if they ever start playing God with it, and they're like, oh, sorry, A-League, you don't get tournaments anymore. And, oh, this small one over here that, was just kind of like tier 3 tournament. Actually, I don't want that because this is what Blizzard did. Blizzard used to have that thing where, like, if they were doing WCS on a day, you couldn't do a tournament the same day that had over a certain prize fund. So that meant they were actively keeping money out of their esports game because they wanted to artificially make the narrative. So I want to, like, give room for both. I don't want them to come in and shut down half the scene and say these are the only approved people, So as long as it was like in a fair way, like they currently do, I think that would be reasonable. Because I noticed in Dota they try to include all the big TOs.
Yeah, and I think for me, like I feel the same way. I feel like hands off is good, and the reason I was trying to work out why, and it's like do you just believe in free market? It's kind of like that when someone monopolizes the entire industry of esports, all of a sudden they become too powerful, and then
absolutely.
If you're a journalist, you're worried about saying something bad about them because maybe you're never going to be allowed back on.
A few years back, ESL tried that. They were in a position where they were number one. This is before a lot of the E-leagues and the rest of them had come in, They were number one. They'd been there the longest. They had the biggest budgets. They had Intel, millions of dollars. And so there were rumblings at the time. Richard did a story about this, that they were trying to see if they could position to do an exclusivity league. Now, they were going to do it in CSGO, a soft manner. Like, they weren't going to actually say, this is an exclusive league, but they'd be like, but teams that play in this only play in this. So it was like it was a way to sort of do it without explicitly saying it. Yeah. Now, I don't blame them. If you're in the position, remember, the monopoly is going to be great for the person who has the monopoly, obviously. So, listen, that's why I like the free market angle you've got there, because if everyone goes for their own interests, which is a concept of capitalism, basically, the hope is we're all going to, like, even each other out. Like, the person who really is the best hopefully succeeds. Yeah. But then if you do something, that we don't like, well, I can provide an alternative and people can go with that. So I'm with you on that one. Like, I like the idea that even if someone's been around a long time, if someone comes in and they are really brilliant, like I'll give the example of MLG. I was never a big fan of MLG because I never cared about Call of Duty. And from StarCraft 2, they seemed like they were just overhyping it because they're Americans, it's not my culture. I always thought this is way overhyped, It's like $5,000 first prize. They're making out like it's like $1 million or something, But when they came and did some CSGO events, they actually were, I think they changed the industry because they came in and because they didn't know the game, they came to people like me and Richard and they used to read Reddit. And if they saw a good suggestion for like the format, they would change it overnight. It was amazing. I've never seen anything like that. Imagine telling ESL, change the whole format of your tournament. Well, they're not going to do that. Come on. Yeah. So what was great was that's why, even though they only did a couple of events, because unfortunately, the Blizzard Activision merger happened and they had to kind of leave CS again. Yeah. They were very well received in CS because everyone kind of felt like, oh, this is exactly the sort of people we want to support.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I think without the competition, where's the drive to do something better? And we're in an industry where we don't know what the best way to do this is. No one does, mate. We'll see next year. Broadcasting will be different because someone's come up with a better format. Speaking about free market,
yes,
I wanted to bring up one subject, which is esports betting. Right. And obviously I bring this up well, first of all, I'm from Luckbox. Luckbox is an esports betting site. And I've also, in the past, I've been very wary about outsiders. We mentioned it before. Sure. Outsiders coming into the industry and getting involved, particularly because in a free market, it's driven by money. And particularly when we talk about betting, there's a lot of money involved, right?
Basically, so that means
there's a lot of power and money and influence to be had, and that I was very scared about betting a few years ago.
Okay.
And I've come to the point where I thought it's actually could do good for the industry if it's done the right way.
Sure.
I mean, how do you feel about it? Because there's obvious negatives about betting as well. Do you think it's good for the industry? Do you think something we need to watch out for?
Like, first of all, I would say, generally politically, I'm a very this term doesn't exist anymore, but I guess libertarian would be the new version. It used to be liberal actually before, which is you're free, you can do what you want, and as long as you're not hurting anyone, you can't use that term anymore. Liberal, it's changed unfortunately. So I'll say libertarian on that one. Where if someone wants to smoke, it's up to you, mate. As long as we might get into it if it's then you get covered by the NHS or something, and do I have to pay for that? Yeah, then we can now argue over the particulars, that's a different matter. But whether you should be allowed to do it, I think it's fine if you do it, as long as you're not hurting me. But I would say on those lines, it's similar with betting. Like, some people want to do it, some people have fun doing it. I think the key thing is, just like, I would give the analogy of alcohol. Like, generally, you could make some pretty strong cases that, even on a minor level, alcohol's not really great for society. It does some bad things, but it also does some good things. It helps with like social aspects. Some people can probably most people can control themselves. They're not out of control. Now, yeah, it's terrible when you see the guy who's drunk. That's really depressing, and we all wish that wasn't the case. But unfortunately, that person, at least from my experience, usually it's not just the specific thing of alcohol. If it wasn't like, there's a joke that Joe Rogan had in one of his stand-ups where he was like, because he was talking about like weed, and he was going, if you say, oh, my brother lost his whole life because of weed, it's like, if weed hadn't got to him, cheeseburgers would have, or scratch tickets, it's like, there's a certain type of person with that personality where, whether it's gambling on skins in CSGO, or it's drinking alcohol, or it's doing whatever else elsewhere in the world, they will be destructive in that manner. And that's going to seem very sad, and because it's going to be so dramatic, you might think, should we just ban it entirely? But my problem with that is there's a great line I remember someone saying, which is like, it's like, it was actually used for censorship, where they said, it's like telling an adult he can't have a steak because a baby would like die from chewing it.
Right.
Okay.
There are questions about it. Same as alcohol. It's the same.
I would want it regulated. That was the thing.
Yeah, and if I think about it though, when betting comes into this industry, it's a revenue source. It's a new revenue source, and particularly when broadcasting is generally done for free, you need a reliable revenue source. Yeah. But so the important thing is that if betting is a new revenue source, and I think it's a considerable one, that it is invested back into esports and enables these events that have it happen. Because in sports betting, the betting companies aren't that involved, because there has to be a wall between them and the organizers.
Yes.
But esports, new territory, and we see betting sponsors on esports events.
Listen, anyone out there who wants to, because there's people like this who just, they don't know how the industry connects, okay? So they're out there and they say, you know what, they should get skins out of CSGO, it just makes kids want to gamble, and you know what, betting shouldn't be allowed because, betting's wrong, I don't know, I'm giving like whatever their argument would be. If you say all that, but then you're like, why isn't ESL Cologne's prize purse higher this year? Mate, you haven't thought this one through. Where do you think the money's going to come from? Like, you can only, at the moment, esports is at a state where at the moment, even when it's getting bigger, it's through side things like the Overwatch League. They're selling a dream there, a vision. They're not selling something that's right now worth that money.
Yeah.
So if you want to be a company who's not doing that, you're trying to actually make it like a business. Like, this event is going to earn its own revenue. It's going to self-sustain. It's going to be able to account for itself. And that's why I'm going to put on a bigger event next year. There has to be literal amount of revenue coming through the door to make up for the expenses. And the biggest faucet in the world at the moment for esports is gambling, because at the moment we don't have Coca-Cola. If Coca-Cola comes, they're going to do a $10 million buy. That's why they don't come. They're only going to come for the $10 million buy. They're not going to come for 100,000. That's chicken feed to them. So until we can make that leap up, and it's a big leap to get the real, the Audis of the world or whatever, this is the best one, especially because they're not, like you say, they're not in a lot of other areas. Like, we're actually one of the only fields they can come into. This is one of the reasons why I often had sponsors that were gambling. Because think about it, right? If my whole brand is like, I wouldn't say controversial, I would just say a very blunt, I'm a very honest person, but as a result, I'm obviously going to say things people don't agree with. Yeah. I have to have a sponsor who can withstand that. Like, if the sponsor is Coca-Cola, I'd have lost them ages ago, wouldn't I? Because then they're going to be like, what? People don't like this, whether we agree or not. You have to get rid of them.
Coca-Cola would have a mute button on your microphone while you were talking.
Whereas the good thing is, the gambling guy himself is already like, listen, I get my own bad PR, mate. Let's just let's make something happen, right?
Yeah. well, on that subject, then, actually, and we talked about it before, about monopolizing an industry. Right now, most events are broadcast on Twitch, right?
Pro League no one seems to mind that monopoly. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and
if you ask the normal person in any other field, what do you think about monopolies? It's terrible, right? Everyone loves it because it's just Twitch. Even I do, kind of, but it has problems.
Yeah, and here's the thing: is I know Twitch has been brilliant. I mean, Twitch is responsible for a lot of the turnaround in esports. But at the same time, I feel like once you have this like headline position and you're unobtainable, no one can catch you anymore. Yes. That's a worry. So, when YouTube came in and Pro League was on YouTube,
I was loving that, yeah.
Yeah, and then ESL did a deal with Facebook. And that seemed to be one step too far, because it just didn't go down well, and it didn't get watched very well either. There's obvious problems in terms of the development on Facebook side was just...
That was the main problem, obviously, enough.
Well, but I think even before the first event came out, there was the ranting and raving on Reddit, which...
Yeah, but here's the problem with that one, mate. I know coming from Dota, the Facebook one was the big one for you guys.
Yeah.
But like you say, in CS, we got it gradually. So everything was on Twitch, and then what happened is both ESL Pro League and DCS went to YouTube for a season, and then it was almost like the next season or next year is when the Facebook deal came in for ESL events. And so if you're in CS, you were already used to going from Twitch to YouTube. Now, here's the problem, mate. YouTube service is fantastic. Their streaming is very good, and the only real downside is, this is what people say, is that they don't like that, because I love the rewind function they have on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that's unbelievable.
But the problem is, people complained that if you do the rewind, then the Twitch chat will be it'll be spoiling. Now, I don't care. Obviously not Twitch chat, YouTube chat. Yeah. Now, I don't care because I don't watch the chat anyway. So for me, it wasn't a downside. Like, that's the only objective, negative people gave. People reacted in CS when it went to YouTube the same way they did with the Facebook one later. Okay. Now, in doing so, they sort of spunked the load a bit early on that one. They should have waited. That wasn't one worth getting mad over. That was just a slight change. And in fact, it was still a very good service. I agree the Facebook one didn't work out very well. I had a lot of flaws with it. So I can't really buy the angle that people everyone who tells me, I knew it'd never work. Again, you ask them why. This is what people never do. Believe it or not, one of the things about me is, even though as my persona I act like I just dismiss all these plebs, I don't. I actually try to find out someone's position, and I try to really let me really get the sense of what you're trying to say here is. So if I asked someone that, why would it fail? The reasons they were given was stuff like, well, Facebook's a site for my grandma and stuff. It's like, that has nothing to do with the topic, that's a feeling, that's a superstitious feeling you've got it's going to fail, It could be amazing. If they'd have invested enough, and if they'd have really actually been genuine about they wanted to they're going to month on month develop things, and they're going to give us clips, and they're going to give us rewind function, and they're going to have everything so it's very easy to find and make this. If they'd have really put in the effort, it might have even started as bad, but it could have gotten really good a few months in. Whereas if you look at it now, it does look like on their end, they didn't. I don't think Facebook thought it through themselves.
It's unfortunate because
could have been so much better.
ESL One Hamburg, the Twitch numbers were sometimes 4 times higher. On an unofficial stream.
There's no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a developing world, and I'm glad you're still here. It's like I say, we've been working in esports together for 20.
A long time now, mate.
20 years, maybe
about 18
years.
Yeah, I came around 2001.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll see you for much more in the future. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, you can tune in without seeing our faces by listening on SoundCloud and Spotify and iTunes, and vice versa. If you want to see what Thorin looks like, jump onto YouTube. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the Luckbox Podcast.